What's your guilty pleasure?
Oh gosh.
I happen to love the drama between Blueface and Chrisean Rock. I love it. I think that that's a pimp, and I think that she got caught up with her pimp.
Jill Scott, you know your big ass didn't have no right coming for none of these kids talking about he a pimp. A pimp is somebody who lies and leeches off of women. If anything, Blue done gave so many women opportunities and careers from them trying to fuck on him for something. They got everything they came for in return. You just mad that that last husband that didn't ever marry you, that came for that coffee shop, tricked you out of coffee shop. Now that's a pimp. Okay, somebody that come and pretend they want to be with you.
The internet didn't just blink, it did a full double take. 1 minute, everyone scrolling past motivational quotes and throwback playlists. And the next minute, Jill Scott's name is welded to Blueface with one word that detonated the timeline like a smoke bomb in a crowded room. Pimp. Just like that, no warm-up, no disclaimer, no gentle landing, and before anyone could even ask, wait, did she really say that? Karlissa Saffold stormed into the conversation checking. Jill Scott with the kind of energy that lets you know this wasn't going to stay polite. Then, as if the universe needed more gasoline, Chrisean Rock decided to speak out, turning what should have been a single hot take into a full-scale cultural standoff. This wasn't just shade. This was legacy versus chaos, respectability versus reality TV, soul music royalty colliding with internet drama like two planets that were never supposed to meet. The reactions came fast, loud, and reckless. Some people clutched pearls, others grabbed popcorn, and a whole lot of folks decided they suddenly had PhDs in morality, feminism, and hip-hop politics overnight. If you thought celebrity discourse had limits, this moment laughed at that idea and kept scrolling, because when a word hits this hard, a mother checks a legend, and Chrisean adds her voice to the fire. You already know this story is about to spiral in ways nobody can control. The moment Jill Scott's name collided with Blueface's, the internet froze like it had just seen a glitch in the Matrix. This wasn't a random influencer throwing shade or a late-night tweet sent without thinking. This was Jill Scott, cultural heavyweight, soul icon, grown folk playlist royalty. Casually using a word that detonated across social media like it was dropped from orbit, pimp, one word, infinite interpretations, and absolutely zero chance it was going to land quietly before anyone could even decide whether to be offended, enlightened, or confused. The timeline exploded, screenshots flew, clips resurfaced. Think pieces started loading before the Wi-Fi could catch up. At first, people didn't even know how to process it. Some fans tried to contextualize, arguing Jill Scott was speaking metaphorically, socially, philosophically, maybe even historically. Others weren't buying that for a second. They heard one thing and one thing only: a respected black woman publicly labeling a controversial black man with one of the most loaded terms possible. And in the internet's favorite genre, outrage, with a side of righteousness, that was more than enough to get the fire started. But this story didn't stay academic or symbolic for long, because Karlissa Saffold stepped into the chat with the energy of someone who felt that line had already been crossed. Karlissa didn't tiptoe, she didn't soften the edges, she checked Jill Scott directly, and when she did, the tone of the entire conversation shifted. This wasn't just commentary anymore, this was personal. In Karlissa's eyes, this wasn't a debate about language or art or metaphor. This was about her son being publicly branded in a way she found disrespectful, dismissive, and damaging. And when a mother feels like her child's name is being dragged by someone with cultural clout, politeness usually exits through the back door. Her response landed like a verbal slap heard across platforms. The internet immediately split into camps. Because of course it did. One side argued Jill Scott was speaking truth to power, calling out behavior they felt needed to be called out, regardless of who it offended. The other side accused her of punching down, of weaponizing respectability politics, of using a word that carries centuries of harm without caring who it hit. Karlissa's defenders rallied hard, framing her as a mother protecting her son from a label that could follow him forever. How critics accused her of overreacting, of misunderstanding Jill Scott's intent, or of clout chasing off a bigger name. Nobody was listening anymore. Everyone was talking. What made this moment so combustible was the contrast. Jill Scott represents a certain era, a certain standard, a certain kind of cultural authority. Blueface represents chaos, controversy, and a constant refusal to fit neatly into anyone's expectations. Karlissa sits at the intersection of that chaos and that protection, unapologetically vocal and allergic to silence. When those worlds collided, it felt less like a conversation and more like a culture clash playing out in real time. This wasn't just about Blueface. It was about who gets to define morality, who gets to label whom, and who's allowed to speak without being checked out. As Karlissa's response spread, the reactions got louder and messier. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds where people debated semantics like their lives depended on it. Was pimp a literal accusation, a metaphor, or social commentary? Did intent matter more than impact? Was Jill Scott above criticism because of her legacy, or did her status make the word hit harder? Everyone suddenly became an expert in linguistics, feminism, and hip-hop sociology, armed with screenshots and absolute confidence. The more confident the take, the less grounded it usually was. Then the narrative widened, because it always does. Old clips of Blueface resurfaced, stitched together to support arguments on both sides. Some used them as proof Jill Scott was right. Others used them to argue that public shaming doesn't fix private dysfunction. The past was dragged into the present and repackaged as evidence, whether it fit or not. Karlissa's previous outspokenness was brought up, framed either as consistency or chaos depending on who was telling the story. Nobody was neutral, and neutrality itself became suspicious. And just when it seemed like this was going to stay, a two-sided clash. Chrisean Rock's name started hovering in the background like a storm cloud. People speculated before she even spoke. Would she defend Blueface? Would she distance herself? Would she escalate? The anticipation alone added tension to an already overloaded situation. Her silence was analyzed like it was a statement, and every hour she didn't respond only made the curiosity louder. The internet doesn't wait patiently, it fills the gaps with assumptions. What made this phase especially chaotic was how quickly the conversation lost its original shape. It stopped being about a word and turned into a referendum on character, parenting, respect, and gender politics. Jill Scott wasn't just Jill Scott anymore. She was a symbol. Blueface wasn't just a rapper. He was a case study. Karlissa wasn't just a mother. She was either a hero or a villain depending on the comment section you wandered into. The story ballooned until it barely resembled the moment that sparked it. By the time Chrisean Rock finally began hinting that she would speak, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Everyone knew her response would tilt the entire narrative. This wasn't just another reaction, it was the wild card. And as the internet leaned forward collectively, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't going to resolve quietly. The checks had been issued, the lines had been drawn, and the next voice to enter was about to push this drama into an entirely new dimension. The second Chrisean Rock's name moved from speculation to expectation, the internet shifted gears like it sensed a plot twist coming. That's how these moments work. The anticipation becomes its own event. People weren't just waiting for her to speak. They were waiting to see which direction the entire narrative would tilt. Would she defend Blueface? Would she drag Jill Scott? Would she side with Karlissa, distance herself, or flip the table entirely? The pause before her response stretched longer than it needed to, and in that silence, the internet filled in the blanks with wild theories and louder opinions than facts could ever manage. While that anticipation simmered, the reaction machine went into overdrive. Memes exploded across timelines like confetti cannons at the wrong party. Jill Scott's past interviews were pulled out of the archives and reinterpreted through this new lens. Quotes that once sounded poetic were suddenly scrutinized for hypocrisy. People argued whether her comment was social commentary or reckless labeling, and they argued like it was a championship fight with bragging rights on the line. Humor did what it always does in these moments. It softened the discomfort just enough for people to keep watching without feeling guilty. Karlissa's check on Jill Scott continued to ripple outward. And with every repost, it gained a little more edge. Some captions framed her as fearless, a mother standing up to cultural royalty without blinking. Others framed her as disrespectful, accusing her of attacking a legend who had earned the right to speak freely. That contrast alone kept the conversation alive. The internet thrives on binaries, and this gave it exactly what it wanted. Either you respect legacy, or you'd defend blood. There was no room for anything in between. Then came the celebrity-adjacent reactions, which always complicate everything. Vague posts started appearing, the kind that never mention names, but are absolutely meant to be decoded. A quote about accountability here, a post about language there. A story slide that felt suspiciously timed. The internet treated each one like a puzzle piece, snapping them together into narratives that may or may not have been real. A single like on the wrong post was enough to spark accusations of taking sides. Silence became suspicious. Support became political. Pop culture comparisons flooded the discourse. Because the internet cannot process conflict without references, people compared this clash to generational standoffs. Like old school versus new school energy colliding without warning. Others said it felt like a morality play disguised as celebrity drama, where everyone pretended to care about ethics while secretly enjoying the chaos. Some joked that this made award show controversies look tame, because at least those come with scripts and rehearsals. This was raw, unscripted, and completely out of anyone's control. As the noise grew, the conversation around Blueface hardened. His behavior, his history, his public persona were all dragged back into the spotlight and used as evidence. For some, Jill Scott's comment felt like overdue accountability. For others, it felt like an oversimplification of a complicated mess that shouldn't be reduced to a single label. The debate wasn't really about Blueface anymore. It was about who gets to define harm and who gets to call it out without being challenged. That question sat at the center of everything, unanswered but constantly argued. And then Chrisean Rock finally spoke, and the temperature changed instantly. Her response didn't land softly, and it wasn't designed to. Whether she chose defense, deflection, or confrontation, it carried the weight of someone who knew the spotlight was already locked in. Her words didn't just add to the conversation, they redirected it. Supporters amplified her message like it was confirmation of what they'd been saying all along. Critics dissected it line by line, searching for contradictions, subtext, or emotional manipulation. The reaction to her response became just as loud as the response itself. What made Chrisean's involvement so powerful was that it blurred the lines people were clinging to. She didn't fit neatly into the legacy versus chaos framework. She complicated it. Her voice reminded everyone that this wasn't just an abstract debate about language. It was a lived experience tangled up in real relationships and real consequences. That complexity didn't slow the outrage, but it did reshape it. The conversation became more personal, more charged, and somehow even messier. The comment sections turned into digital battlegrounds. People weren't listening, they were performing. Every reply was crafted to win, not to understand. Screenshots were treated like evidence. Tone was treated like intent. And certainty replaced curiosity. The louder the comment, the more attention it got. Nuance drowned quietly while outrage took a victory lap. The algorithm rewarded intensity, and this story had intensity to spare. What stood out most during this phase was how quickly the conversation abandoned resolution. Nobody was actually trying to settle anything. The goal wasn't understanding, it was dominance. Being right mattered more than being fair. The debate looped endlessly, feeding on itself as long as people kept engaging. Even those who claimed to be exhausted by the Drama couldn't stop watching. Fatigue and fascination coexisted in the same scroll dot as this chapter reached its peak. Something shifted beneath the noise. The jokes started to feel sharper, the arguments more repetitive, and the discomfort more noticeable. A few voices began, asking whether this had gone too far, whether a single word had been turned into a cultural battlefield that nobody could walk away from clean. Those voices didn't dominate, but they lingered, creating cracks in the momentum. The escalation didn't explode again, it stretched. It became heavier, more entrenched. Opinions solidified into identities, people chose sides and settled in, prepared to defend them indefinitely. The story no longer needed new information to survive. It lived on reactions alone. And as the internet prepared to move on to the next headline, it left behind a charged atmosphere, unresolved tensions, and the unmistakable sense that the real fallout hadn't even begun yet. By the time the noise began to thin, the impact of this moment had already settled in deeper than most people were willing to admit. That's the quiet phase nobody likes to analyze because it doesn't come with memes or viral clips. Just consequences. When the timeline moves on, the labels stay, and for everyone involved in this clash, the internet didn't just react, it archived. What was said, how it was said, and who said it are now frozen in screenshots, ready to be resurrected anytime the next controversy needs context. For Jill Scott, the aftermath landed in an uncomfortable space between legacy and accountability. To her longtime supporters, this was a moment taken wildly out of context, proof that even cultural icons aren't safe from the internet's appetite for outrage. They argued her words were social commentary, not a literal accusation, and that the backlash revealed how fragile public discourse has become. But for critics, that explanation didn't hold. They felt a line had been crossed, not because of who Blueface is, but because of who Jill Scott represents. When someone with that level of cultural respect speaks, the words hit harder, linger longer, and carry weight whether intended or not. The debate over her intent didn't disappear. It calcified. Karlissa Saffold walked away from this chapter with her image sharpened, not softened. To supporters, she emerged as unapologetic, fearless, and loyal to a fault, a mother who refuses to let anyone, legend or not, define her son publicly without pushback. To detractors, she solidified her reputation as combative, impulsive, and drawn to confrontation. What both sides agreed on, whether they liked it or not, was that she could no longer be ignored. This moment etched her voice deeper into the conversation, ensuring that when she speaks again, people will already be listening with opinions locked and loaded. Chrisean Rock's involvement added another layer that refused to settle neatly. Her response didn't resolve anything, it complicated everything. Supporters saw vulnerability, honesty, and someone navigating chaos in real time. Critics saw deflection, emotional volatility, and more questions than answers. What became clear, though, was that her voice shifted the framing. This stopped being just about a word or a comment. It became about lived experience colliding with public judgment. That collision doesn't produce clarity, it produces friction. And friction was exactly what kept this story alive even after the peak outrage passed. Beyond individual reputations, the broader cultural damage sat with the audience itself. This moment exposed how quickly conversations about language, power, and harm collapse into spectacle. People argued passionately about respect while disrespecting each other in the process. They claimed to care about nuance while flattening complex realities into hot takes. The internet demanded accountability while thriving on the chaos it created. That contradiction wasn't subtle, it was structural, and it played out in real time. With real people absorbing the impact, relationships behind the scenes didn't escape untouched either. Moments like this don't end with a single apology or clarification. They change dynamics. Trust gets tested when public commentary replaces private conversation, even if cooler heads prevail later. The memory of being checked, dragged, or defended in front of millions doesn't fade easily. Every future interaction now carries this history. Whether spoken or not, silence becomes loaded. distance becomes easier than dialogue. What's most unsettling is how this incident will be remembered moving forward, not as a nuanced discussion about language or accountability, but as that moment, a reference point, the shorthand months from now. People will bring it up casually, detached from the original context, using it to justify new arguments or old biases. That's the curse of virality. Serious moments get reduced to bullet points, stripped of complexity, and replayed without empathy. Yet, despite the fatigue, curiosity remains. That's how stories like this survive. There are unresolved tensions, unanswered questions, and they ever present possibility of another spark. The internet knows this circle well enough to expect a sequel. One post, one interview, one offhand comment could reopen everything instantly. Attention doesn't disappear, it waits. The clarity this aftermath offers isn't comforting, but it is revealing. This wasn't really about Jill Scott versus Karlissa or Blueface versus public opinion. It was about how quickly cultural conversations turn into battlegrounds and how little space there is for resolution once outrage takes over. Lines were drawn, perceptions shifted, and the story outgrew its original moment. And as the timeline scrolls forward, one truth lingers beneath the surface. This chapter didn't end cleanly, it settled. And in the world of celebrity, culture, and controversy, stories that settle don't stay quiet forever. They resurface when the timing is right, louder, sharper, and with even less patience for nuance than before. And this is exactly why moments like this never really end. They just go quiet until the next spark hits. What started as one word turned into a cultural standoff, and now that the noise has cooled, the real conversation is sitting right in front of us. Was this accountability or overreach? Was Karlissa protecting her son or escalating a situation that didn't need to explode? Did Jill Scott cross a line? Or did the internet twist her words beyond recognition? If you watch this whole breakdown, you already have an opinion, so don't keep it locked up. Drop your thoughts in the comments and say what everyone else is arguing around. Who handled this the right way? Who made it worse? And do you think this clash says more about the people involved or about the culture that turned it into a spectacle? The comment section is where the real debate lives, and I want to see it active, because silence is how narratives get rewritten without challenge. And while you're here, smash that like button like it owes you money, because the algorithm doesn't respect quiet opinions. If you want unfiltered commentary, sharp breakdowns, and stories everybody else is afraid to touch, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drama doesn't send calendar invites, and when it drops fast. This channel stays locked in at the intersection of celebrity, culture, and controversy. We don't sugarcoat, we don't look away, and we don't pretend these conversations don't have real impact. New stories surface constantly, old ones resurface when you least expect them. And we'll always be here connecting the dots, because when words spark wars and opinions move faster than facts, somebody has to slow it down and break it apart. Welcome to Celeb SYNC, where every headline has a ripple effect.